Carey, who liked to be called Old Vaporlock, was a guy who I knew because I'm a big fan of all the old westerns. And Carey Lofton and Dale Van Sickle, who also worked on Duel, were two of the most famous stuntmen in the annals of Hollywood history. And I wanted Carey, and Carey then suggested bringing Dale along. Dale drove the car, and Carey drove the truck, and that was kind of the way it was. There's no hidden piece of, antiquity about Carey Lofton as a background character or standing by the roadside. He was just the truck driver. But he was a brilliant truck driver because I couldn't have gotten any of these shots if it weren't for how safely Carey drove that truck and yet made it look dangerous and frightening and deadly. But Carey was a very, very safe driver. And actually, on certain scenes, we couldn't get the truck to go very fast, so I had to use tricks like having the camera lower to the ground. And to create more speed from the truck, I always put cliff walls on, let's say, the east side of the highway. And then I'd be in the insert car with Pat Hustis driving, with Jack Marta, the DP, and the operator, and we'd be shooting toward the truck, but always with that cliff rushing by. And as you know, you don't have to go faster than 25 miles an hour. But if you shoot dead flat to a wall or an obstacle moving by, it makes the truck look like it's going 100 miles an hour. And the longer the lenses, the faster the truck looks. When I say longer the lenses, anything around, let's say, a 35 or a 50 look awfully good in terms of speed. If you went a little bit wider, as long as you didn't show the road, it still looked like you were going really fast if you stayed dead to the side. So many of those shots were just sort of shot slow, but cheated with geography moving back by very quickly. There's a couple shots that are sped up because the camera lost speed. The camera actually lost speed and went from 24 to about 12. And I didn't have any other coverage, and I was forced to use that.
What happened out there, mister?
I'll use your men's room, please.
Yeah, through the door, on the right, down the hall, turn left.
Part of the whole thing when he goes into the cafe was I continue to try to get the audience to sort of have a first-person experience with the Dennis Weaver character. And to that end, I thought by taking him out of the car and walking him through the cafe after he'd almost been killed, and he's shaking, he just wants to get some water on his face, and walking him into the bathroom, and then walking him back into the cafe, and then walking him all the way over to where he sits down. And then he looks out the window in the same shot, and the truck is parked across the street. And then he turns, that's our first cut, and every single person in that cafe is a suspect. And this is before the days of Steadicam, so that was simply a handheld Aeroflex. And we had to ADR everything. We had to, Foley everything because the camera was so loud, even if you put a blanket over it, it was still a handheld Aeroflex. But later on, it was very effective once we got the sounds of the motor or the camera out of the picture and got the other Foleyed sounds in there. It sounded really good. What I learned from Hitchcock was don't ever let the audience off the hook. Be a whore about keeping the audience on tenterhooks as long as possible before giving them some clue or some kind of relief. And so if Hitchcock was ever whispering over my shoulder during the making of Duel, it was simply that. Don't answer these questions just because ABC has airtime problems and you've got an air date. Take your time and draw out the suspense as long as possible.
I don't know. All I did was pass this stupid rig a couple of times and he goes flying off the deep end. He has to be crazy.
In the morning, he recorded the lines, and we would just work with his dialogue on the Nagra, just playing right back to him from the actual Nagra, from that little small speaker on top of the machine.
Why didn't I leave right away when I saw his truck outside? Then I'd know what he intends to do.
It helped him react to his own thoughts. To have his voice played back to him was like having the thought occur spontaneously. So he was able to use those playbacks to be able to physicalize and emote what he was feeling.
Would you mind checking those radiator hoses?
I'll do that. Take a look at my snakes if you have time.
It was fun to take reptiles that people were afraid of and put them in the movie to just sort of add to the chaos and the anxiety of not only was the truck against him, but all the forces of natural law were against this character as well.
I'd like to report a truck driver that's been endangering my life.
Your name again?
David Mann.
There was no stuntman at all in that scene. The film was shot once. That particular angle was shot from two different angles with two cameras, perhaps a third camera, a real low shot on a hi-hat on a board. But Dennis was in the booth. That was all Dennis did himself, and Dennis was very insistent on driving the car, except for certain things where all of us ran and said, Dennis, you're not doing this next shot. But even at one point, Dennis goes up half a hill, and you can see out the whole front window like in a jet plane. The horizon line just goes like this radically and then recorrects. That's Dennis driving up the bank of a shoulder of a highway and back on the highway again. Dennis did a lot of his own driving, and Dennis was very proud of the fact that he was in that phone booth when the truck was coming. And he had plenty of time to get out, and it was practiced and rehearsed over and over and over again. And there was all sorts of fail-safe points. There were these stakes in the ground, and Kerry Lofton had his eye on little flags, which off camera, that meant the point of no return. That meant that if Kerry did not see Dennis leave the phone booth by the time the grill of his truck got to that red flag, Kerry simply was going to abort to the left. And there still would have been a lot of clearance between the booth and Kerry's aborted driving. But Dennis did it just at the right time. We only did it once. I didn't want to tempt fates and do it a second time. And Dennis got out of the phone booth so the truck didn't have to abort. It just went ahead and plowed into the phone booth.
Why'd he bring back cages out?
Lucille Benson, I asked her to come back and do the same scene with John Belushi from Duel in 1941.
Fill her up. That's
What's the matter? Car trouble?
Well, in a way, yes. I wonder if you'd do me a favor.
What's that?
And then Close Encounters of the Third Kind, I used the two older people in the car from Duel. I used those same two actors in the helicopter in Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Look, I'm a sap for nostalgia, you know what I'm saying? I like that. I like never forgetting, you know, the old ties. They had a dead man's clutch on the truck, so the truck would continue to roll with nobody in the truck and hit the car and go off the cliff. I'm not quite sure how they accomplished that. I was busy on the cliffside setting 7 different positions. In the best spots I knew, I could put the cameras because that was the only truck we had. We didn't have a take 2 on that. That was going to be the end of the movie. There was no reshooting after that scene was over. So I was very obsessed with getting all that right, while Kerry and the physical effects people were up topside getting the truck rigged to plow into the car and go off the cliff. I just know that when I saw dailies in that scene, I just used one of the 7 cameras all the way down because the shot was so extraordinary. There was one shot, I'm not sure who the operator was on that, but the operator deserves a medal, who followed the truck and the car all the way down, including into a large plume of dust. And you would assume the shot would be over, but then the entire massive tanker part of the truck reemerges from that cloud and continues its journey down the cliff. It was just an extraordinary shot, and that had to be the only shot used. I don't think I saw any dailies because I was living out in Pear Blossom the entire time I was shooting Duel with the company. There was no time to really see dailies out there. We couldn't go back into town and see dailies, so I was just relying on lab reports to say that there was no hair in the gate and no negative scratches and the film was exposed properly, and I was relying on Jack Marta to tell me if he thought it was going to be okay, and I really relied on his expertise and his years of wisdom being a really good DP. But when the movie was over, I was faced with something uglier than just having not been able to see my own rushes. I was faced with the fact that I had 3.5 weeks to an air date from the day I wrapped the principal photography on Duel. There was 3 weeks and a couple of days to the time that story was going on ABC, Movie of the Week. So I couldn't just do it with one editor. And as a result, 5 editors worked on Duel, and I was like bicycling from editing room to editing room for the next 3.5 weeks. It was an amazing time. Each of these editors was really talented, and they did some great work on the show. And I remember a sequence that one of the editors created that wasn't even in the script or wasn't even in the way I shot the film, but he created a kind of tempo when the truck is finally bearing down on Dennis Weaver's character, and the truck is forcing Dennis to hit speeds of like 100 miles an hour, and there was never enough coverage, and he began stealing from other sequences to have enough footage to create a faster cutting rhythm to culminate in this crash where the car goes into the wall, sort of totals itself or totals the front end of the wall before the climactic climb up the hill, before the climactic fall into the canyon. And he had created that scene unbeknownst to me that he was working this way. I came into the room and he said, "You want to see something?" I said, "Sure." And he showed me the sequence that just blew me away. Sound design is just a glove that goes over the hand of where the camera is positioned. Sound fits like a glove. It has to. It has to be a partner to everything you see and everything you sense. I mean, sound is going to make everything scarier.
Something wrong?
Sound is going to make everything, more suspenseful. And with a silent movie is certainly not as suspenseful as being able to hear the creaks and groans in a haunted house with doors and windows opening and shutting. It was the same with Duel. It's a haunted truck movie almost. And here you have a guy sleeping by the train track. He's so exhausted he kind of passes out. And I put the sound of a truck into actually a visual of the train coming around the corner. So thrown way out of focus in the background, this object that comes into the rear window. And you can tell it's a train, it's red. The truck was never red. I always said, I wish that train had been brown. It would have been a much better cheat for the audience. But you can tell it's a train. But I put the sound of the truck in. And you hear the truck, you hear the truck, you hear the truck, and suddenly, bang, it's the train going by. Dennis wakes up with a start, he screams, he grabs onto the wheel, and then the sound of the truck becomes the sound of the diesel freight. It passes, and Dennis starts to laugh, just from sheer exhaustion and relief that he's still alive, and joy that he's alive, and he's laughing and laughing and laughing, and then he blithely just sort of moseys on his way.